Welcome to the Living Ageless and Bold podcast. I'm your host, Christina Daves, and in each episode, I bring you amazing women who inspire, educate, and share their experiences and journeys along the way. So grab a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, find a cozy spot, and let's relax and have some fun hearing what can be accomplished after 55. So today we are in for an amazing treat. Katherine Sellery is the founder of CPR, which is Conscious Parenting Revolution. And we're going to dive deep into that. She is an author, a speaker. She's taken the TEDx stage. She's a media expert. She's trained thousands of people how to deal with relationships with their children. And we are lucky to have her with us today. Welcome, Katherine.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh my. Okay. First of all, let's just start with the title, CPR.
Yeah, right. Life support. Exactly. So that's really what it is. When we have the skills we need to be able to work through conflict, it is like life support. It keeps our relationships going.
Right. So I always like to kind of do the backstory. Obviously, you got here for a reason. So
Yeah.
what led you to this?
Always so insightful. Yes. So I think, one of my TED Talks is surviving unconscious parenting. And so I think as, survivors of unconscious parenting, we might have experienced that we were loved, and that doesn't mean that the people who were taking care of us knew what they were doing.
Do you think things have changed? Like you say that, and I think of like my parents and my grandparents. They didn't have Google. They didn't have YouTube. Like there weren't places you could go. You had a book that, some books you could read. But do you think, that was a cause of any of the change from, where we are now, like my parenting versus my mother versus my grandmother?
For sure. I haven't thought a lot about what created the revolution. However, access to information for sure has had an impact. There's no doubt about that. And having the ability to transform the way we think about things and how we look at children, our mindset around behaviors. A lot of the information isn't necessarily new, but I think it's a combination of access to information as well as the heartfelt desire to tune into maybe there's something about my own skills that could be up leveled here to change the outcome. It's a lot of different things.
So where do we start? And I think about we're in different phases. You've got young children, you've got teenagers. I'm a new empty nester. Like all these periods of our lives, I'm sure, we've done things. And so where do we start?
Yeah, well, I think that, this is an audience with a more mature, I think, probably following, where a lot of the women who are listening are 50 or, 5 or older and whatnot. That doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't still parenting younger kids, because we know, right? A lot of parents are now becoming parents a lot older, or it could be a blended family. I mean, there's so many things that could be happening with regard to the people that are in our care and the ages of the people in our care. And I was on a call today with a client who has one that's 30 years old and another one that's 23 years old. And so even those relationships, I don't think we ever stop caring about the dynamic we have with our kids, regardless of the age. And if there's something about the relationship that doesn't work, or we feel we're not close, or we're just not as close as we wished we would have been, and we want to have better relationships, we can. And I think that's the promise, is that we can actually have the relationships we want. We just need to know how to do it.
And so what's the first step? Somebody's listening and, they're estranged from an adult child, or, don't talk to them as much anymore. What do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are the conditions that need to be necessary for change to happen? I guess that's one of the sort of ingredients that we're going to look at. What are the conditions that are necessary for change to happen? And one of the main conditions I think that is necessary is to not be defensive. So I think that gets in the way a lot of times, because it's hard for us to be present with another person's perspective when we feel that their perspective doesn't mirror up with the way we see things. And so, how do we hold the space for someone else to have it just the way they do, even if it's not the way we wish they did or if it's how we do?
Do you need to be in person? Can you do it on the phone? Like, is proximity, it's hard. And then sometimes it's just easier to say, oh, I'll just, I'll deal with it at another time, like hoping that things get better. But time just, this. I mean, with adult children, time just flies by.
I mean, in person is great. Sometimes it's not. So, sometimes I have another client who actually has some rules around engagement. The rules for engagement are that actually it can't be in person and that it has to be by letter, that there has to be enough space for the written word to actually arrive without any knee jerk responses, that there be time for emotions to calm down and for things to step outside of just that knee jerk habitual response, which can, sometimes lead us nowhere. So actually, sometimes space is a wonderful thing.
I'll tell you an interesting story. It was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. My son started playing hockey at a very young age. And any hockey moms listening, what that life is.
I know.
But he said, take advantage of that time because they're in the back seat and you're driving. And it's a great opportunity to have conversations that they might not want to have face to face, but they might want to have with you. So it was so amazing to have that you really could. And even if I asked an uncomfortable question, if he didn't want to answer it, he didn't have to look me in the eye. Like he could change the subject. So that was some of the best parenting advice I ever got.
That's so beautiful that you had that opportunity to, yeah, take advantage of all those hours in the car going back and forth and schlepping around.
And not making them uncomfortable being
Yeah.
face to face. So
But
that is interesting with
really,
the letters.
it really has to do with how you handle that time behind the wheel. Because some other kids might respond and say, oh my God, it was death by lecture. So it really would have to do with how you were being in the space, right? To be able to make that a win-win.
It seemed to be okay. We'll see. It
I
hasn't
think you
come
must
back
have done
yet.
it. You must have done a really good job of just being present to the energy and what was, alive in him, and also creating that space. Yeah.
I always joked with them. I said, listen, I'm keeping a notebook because you're going to go to therapy someday and it's all my fault. So I'll just keep writing things down as I do them wrong. Just give this to you and you can take it to the therapist.
Yeah. I think that we are always going to make mistakes, all of us. There's no way around it. And that ability to just be like, yeah, I'm human.
And every family is different. You can't compare yourself to your best girlfriend or your sister or your cousin, or because every family dynamic, and it's not all perfect. It's, what my girlfriend said this years ago, a marriage is peaks and valleys. And she goes, unfortunately, it's more valleys than peaks, especially when you're raising kids, because there's so much going on. It's what you do in those peaks and those valleys. So I feel like raising kids is the same way. You have great times and then you have issues. And
Yeah.
I'm just so fascinated by all this. So you mentioned unconscious parenting, and that's one of your TED Talks. What is unconscious parenting?
I think that, lots of ways for us to kind of go through our relationship with our kids and not understand why necessarily we are having the interactions we're having. And I have so many parents over the years who feel like, they're being disrespectful, they're being mean, they're being misbehaving. There are all these things or ways that we speak about the behaviors that we don't like. And so I think the more and more we become conscious, the more we recognize that there are surface behaviors, what we call the presenting problems, and that the presenting problems, although they might feel like they're the problem, are really the symptom. So I think one of the steps in becoming conscious is recognizing that a lot of things are symptoms, not actually problems, that the problems are the underlying issues that are not obvious, and that what we find ourselves getting upset about and responding to are actually the symptoms that are expressing in ways that are socially unacceptable, inconvenient, probably messy, and that they are the tragic expression of the unmet needs. So one of the cornerstones, I think, of becoming a conscious parent is recognizing that these are not actually the primary issues. These are the secondary issues, but we treat them like they're the primary issues. Because most of the people, adults and children and adolescents and teens and young adults and all the rest of it, a lot of folks don't know how to talk about what's going on for them. So they act out what's going on for them. And the more upset the person is inside, the more tragic the expression of the unmet needs. And we can make it about our experience of those rather than, oh, yeah, I'm having an experience of something. And, I guess I could talk a lot about my experience of being around this tragic expression. Or I could just be like, oh, yeah, of course I'm going to have an experience, but this isn't even about me. This is about what's going on for them. So that ability to do that, I think, is like huge.
We have another guest on, and I'd love to introduce you, Cheryl Lynn, who she has, it's called the Chair of Joy.
Yes, actually, she introduced us.
Oh, right. Wonderful. So I was going to say, you two are totally in alignment of needing to connect. And when I first met her, it was the same thing. I thought right away, oh, this is perfect. This will take the place of the timeout chair. And then I read further into her materials, and sure enough, that's what it says. It's just shifting that whole narrative of, like you're saying, the acting out, but what is it really? How much do you think things are passed down, like generation to generation?
A lot. I mean, transgenerational patterns and trauma and unaddressed trauma, I think inevitably gets passed down. It's impossible for it not to be. The only thing that stops it in its tracks is when we actually take the time to really be with whatever is there. And I think, I don't know, I mean, it's popular to ignore stuff. It's popular to numb ourselves out. It's popular to put on a happy face, and some family cultures actually only allow those. So it's really difficult if you've grown up in that ecosystem to not pass it right down to the next generation. The
Right.
only thing that's going to stop that from happening is a wake up call. And those wake up calls can happen in many different ways. So, kind of going back to what you started with earlier and thinking, like, what happened to this generation where there's been more attention to our presence and how we are and how we're being and
Right.
how much that affects what we receive and, if you will, the harvest that we reap. If we think in those terms, then when we're reaping a harvest, we can complain about the harvest, or we can also be, sort of thoughtful, like, well, what did I plant? What seeds did I plant that this is the harvest that I'm reaping? So in relationship
Ah,
to our children, if we look at it that way, it's not a guilt trip. It's not a shame. It's not something that's supposed to evoke out of you this sense of, oh, I screwed up. It's my fault. That's not it. It's oh, wow, what have I been, creating here? What are the seeds that I'm planting that this would be the outcome? Because now that I have that perspective, I'm much more empowered to be able to plant different seeds, reap different harvests, have different outcomes. And it all relies on me. I don't have to be looking to change or manipulate anyone else or get anyone else to uplevel their skills or get anyone else to do anything. I can create so much of the change that I want just by the way I'm being and being more consciously aware of the seeds that I'm planting.
and can you plant your garden later in life? Like, say you realize this, like now at our age, like, oh, how can I fix what I've done?
And that's where I get most excited, is for anyone out there who feels like there's a relationship that I wish I could heal and I don't know how to do it. And I don't know if it's even possible. And that's where I guess the greatest joy for me is that, yes, it's always possible. It's always possible. And that's not to say that it happens like that, but sometimes it happens like that. I've seen it happen like that. So that's where I'm like, well, sometimes it does.
Right. Sometimes the one person probably just needed the other person to say what they said.
Yep, absolutely. Sometimes you get to be the leader and you get to be the one who has the skills. Sometimes it's the person with the most skills in the room. And the skills can just be the ability to be open-hearted. It doesn't mean that you have to have gotten a degree in, communication, assertiveness, training, conflict resolution, and mediation. It's really just, I have nothing to prove. I have nothing to defend. I'm just here. The one thing I do know is how much I love you.
Yeah, and that says a lot. So, what do you think COVID did when we were all, for kids, with mom and dad home 24/7 and no socialization? And I've talked to some, younger parents, and they've got kids, that just are started post COVID, started like first grade, and there's a lot of issues with these kids because they didn't have preschool. They didn't. So, how do you know if it's me as a parent, if it's them, if it's the isolation, if it's like, what do you recommend for parents right now that had those kids that were locked up for 2 years?
It's so, it's such extraordinary times. This
Right.
is sort of a social experiment. And the kids that didn't get to socialize with their friends and be together, and some of them are really lacking the skills and how to be with their fellow, 5, 6, 7, 8 year olds, really is a skills deficit. And so I would say they're behind a year. Maybe they're behind 2 years, depending on where they live. And to just have the patience and know that they'll catch up, right? Those kids will catch up. And some of the kids who I've met a lot of these kids and families where they are so much happier not going to school. Yeah. And so those families, I think what they had were kids that were anxious, and they didn't have necessarily the skills that they needed to deal with their anxiety in school. And so coming home and just being home in that little safe container, it was like, woof, this has been good for me. And now I won't go. So there are a whole bunch of kids that are on strike right now, and they won't go. They won't go back. And I say, good for you. Don't go back until you're ready. And let's get you ready, and let's get your teachers and your counselors and your schools ready to support the kids that need more support around socialization and feeling at home and safe, psychologically safe, free from the threat of ridicule and embarrassment. So those are kids that were not free from those threats. They were very anxious. They were always on edge, waiting for somebody to say something that was inappropriate, and didn't have the resilience to be able to be like, oh, what you think about me is none of my business. But we need to teach our kids to have that resilience, to have that, centered sense of self that's so strong that really what you think about me really is none of my business and it doesn't affect me. But how do we get kids to that place, especially in a world that is constantly reinforcing what other people think about you is really important?
And what do the parents do if they don't have that kind of confidence in themselves? How do you raise your kids to have that? That's difficult.
Well, again, a very insightful comment. You can't expect your children to be more assertive than you are. So if you want your children to be assertive, be assertive. If you have a skills deficit, then learn. Number one source of everything is mom and dad, or mom and mom, or whatever those primary givers are. You're the ones who are modeling for them conflict resolution. You're the ones who are modeling assertiveness or aggressiveness. Which one are you?
Right. We had something really interesting that happened in our family, and my husband was the one who actually uncovered this. Our daughter just was really upset about something and couldn't understand how we could do this and this and that. And my husband realized he's a firstborn, I'm a firstborn, and our son is a firstborn. And then we have our daughter. And he said, Megan, I don't know what it's like to be the youngest, to and so do you think, is there any connection with what you teach and what you talk about that could have a birth order effect?
I haven't really looked into a lot of the birth order, although I could say anecdotally, yes. And I spent so many years in Asia, and so many of my clients are Asian. And I think in Asia, as well as in America, of course, and other European countries, it's really hard to say. But yes, there's a lot of pressure on the firstborn. And so there's a certain conversation that happens, which I'm thinking about now with some of my Indian clients and Chinese clients, around the responsibility of the firstborn. And then that later has turned into some interesting conversations about the pressure that put on that person.
And you just brought up culture too. That's a whole nother dynamic.
It's a whole nother dynamic, and it's fascinating because we spent 33 years in Hong Kong, and only recently over COVID did we start spending more time in the United States. And so I would say really more of my life has been overseas than it's been in America. And most of my clients are either not US citizens or not Americans or are mixed marriages. And that one of the things that we used to joke about was that you can have a family which has two different lineages, and that will in and of itself create all kinds of conflict. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. It just will create lots and lots of opportunities to work through things. And at the same time, I've known so many different US couples who come from, maybe one comes from the Northeast and grew up in Boston, and the other one comes from LA. And I can tell you, those are equally profoundly different cultures. So even within our own country here, you can have such different cultures based on where you grew up or just your families and how your families operated.
Yeah.
They're all so different that it creates opportunities for conflict resolution.
Fascinating that you say that. I'm first generation American. My parents are German, and my husband grew up in the South. We were raised very, very differently. Europeans and, Southern Americans are different people.
Yeah. Which part of the South is he from?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Okay. Yeah. Because I was born in New Orleans. So I had that whole Louisiana, very Southern kind of thing going on in my family too. And yeah, there are a lot of, what do I want to say, beliefs that we grow up with. And when I think about my mother and I think about the Deep South, I think about what will the neighbors think? Yeah, it was a lot about what will the neighbors think? What are other people thinking? And so when I talked about this idea of getting to the place where your children are free from what other people think about them, that's one of the big ones that you have to overcome. It's one thing to be considerate of your neighbor and lower your, stereo at 10 o'clock at night because it's bothering them. And you would do that not because what will my neighbors think about me being rude, but I want to be considerate that maybe my behavior is getting in the way of them meeting their needs. So the emphasis is completely different around learning to be considerate of other people's needs versus what are they going to think about me and the judgments they might have about me, my family, my mother, etc.
Right. Right. I think it's just that getting comfortable in your own skin and then helping your kids do it as well.
Yeah, and getting comfortable in your own skin for starters is really important because again, they're going to look to see what you do, not what you say. So, the old adage, is really backwards. It really is all about not what you say, but what you do. And that's what people are watching. What are you doing? How are you being? And that speaks louder than anything, right?
Right. Again, back to the showing them. We had another guest talking about how she found her true self. She went through breast cancer and a divorce, and she did something called mirroring, where you literally look at yourself in the mirror and you say, "I love you." And then once you get comfortable with that, she said it's really hard to do that. And then you start to tell yourself good things about you. Like it's so that you can show up in confidence and be your true self and know nobody's perfect, that you're okay and you can be that person. And I think you need that to then reflect that for your children. Because if they see that, then you can have these better conversations and better, well, yeah, mom's not perfect. It's, she's comfortable in her skin. She's good. She's okay.
So true. And, that kind of brings us back into the world of the perfectionism and that whole sort of transgenerational, everybody has to be perfect. And if not, you're ashamed of yourself and there's something wrong and you can't you can't hold your head high. And this whole dynamic around socially prescribed perfectionism, which is again, are other people proud of me? Are other people speaking about us as a family or mom and dad, are they talking about me in ways that, they're proud of me? And again, all of the emphasis is training the mind of the child to be looking around to see what other people think about me, which is a dysfunctional form of perfectionism, which is the opposite of what we all want. We want self-reference perfectionism, where it's about, I feel good about myself. I like the way I showed up today. I was really happy with how I was with my, teammates, my classmates, my friends, my parents. I'm touching back into my own sense of what I value and sensing into how I feel about how I was. I didn't really feel good about that. I wish I hadn't been so explosive. I think I'm going to call them up and apologize. And it's always back to a self reference space. And self reference perfectionism is the healthy form, socially prescribed is the unhealthy form or the toxic form. And a lot of families don't know the difference.
And how much you brought this up, but how much of this now, like in the people that you work with, does social media affect all of this? Because you have the family dynamic, you have all this going on, and then you've got the phone and what's happening on Instagram and TikTok, and they're perfect and they're beautiful. And
I mean, I talk about that as a gateway drug. So, social media can be a gateway drug to depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. It is a gateway drug. And, you know, don't take my word for it. The research bears this out to be true. So, we have to be really careful. And I think children can get so sucked in again back to what other people think about me and how many likes am I getting, and they get so obsessed, and it all comes back to this idea that what you think about me is none of my business. So how do we ground that back into our kids, especially when you have families that are using rewards and punishments, and they're trying to get their kids to behave based on what they're going to do to them, in either the form of a goodie, the reward, or in forms of the punishment. But again, it's all about changing your behavior based on the externals. So we live in a culture that cultivates external locus of causality in every single way possible, including our school systems, which are focused on the dysfunctional form of perfectionism, where they put the coveted, kid on the stage and look at, Johnny or Lucy, and this is the way we should all be working toward. And aren't they great? And again, it's never based on what's your individual situation. What are the areas where you're, a savant? What are the ones you need help in? Let's encourage you in the ones where you need more support. Let's stretch you in the areas where you need to expand. Let's just look at each and every person individually. And it's a complete remaking of our educational system.
I told my kids that all the time growing up. I'm like, you can't be good at everything. You can't be. Find what you like, find what you're good at, and work hard at that. And know that somebody else is going to be good. We had a friend whose the mom literally had told them they were the best at everything. You're the best musician, the best athlete, the best this, the best that. Like that poor child, when they realize when they get older, and set them up for this, made them the captain of the team. And I kept thinking, oh, and they were great kids, but I was like, wow, that is going to come back at some point because you can't be. And I told them that with job applications. Like, you guys, you've been getting trophies your whole life. When you get out of college and apply for a job, one person gets the job, one person. So you've got to learn to feel what that feels like. And it sucks, but we've all been there. Not everybody gets the job. That's so to learn that you're right. We put everyone on these pedestals and the valedictorian and the, MVP, but everybody can't be that one person. So what are you good at?
Right. And, I mean, self esteem is sort of what we're really talking about here. And we're back to self esteem is not what other people think about me. It's what I think about myself. And have I been reflecting? Have I been able to increase my sense of what I think of as self when I think about myself? Do I have a really good self concept? Or is my concept based on, again, well, does this person think about me? Or how many, people over here are liking me? And, again, the mind is out there. The mind is out there. So I would say, back to those cornerstones of conscious parenting, this is one of them. This cornerstone is one of them, is that we want our children to be thoughtful, considerate, and thinking about other people, as well as themselves. And we need to develop within children from a very young age that they are not to be dismissed, and that they can honor themselves. And a lot of the parenting that we've been subject to, I think our generation and beyond, and some of the new younger parents who I'm going to say have had the benefit of being able to walk the razor's edge a little bit more when it comes to being consciously aware of themselves and finding their voices. And trying to keep kids connected to their inner voice is not inconsiderate. It's not selfish, and it has nothing to do with bad behavior. So a lot of times we talk about bad behavior as the kids that say no, or the kids that talk back, or don't do as they're told, as if somehow obedience and compliance and doing as you're told is a good thing. Which, I'm just like, really? You want that? I don't think anybody really wants that. What they're looking for is consideration, harmony, ease. And they grew up in families where if you had an opinion of your own or you spoke up, it was considered disrespectful. And so that is how the framework goes, is that those are disrespectful kids. And I'm like, well, maybe they spoke up in ways that were loud, maybe not polished, and also they're fighting for their voice. They're fighting for a stand in things, and they don't know how to do it because the powers that be have that power over them. And how do you encourage them to continue to stay connected to their inner sense of things while navigating this world and all these outer voices and people with lots of opinions?
Oh, it's fascinating. Where can people find your TED Talk?
Well, I have 3. And so, yes, there's a lot. And it's my own journey to finding my own voice again after having grown up in a family where, there were a lot of things that were cultivated, but the inner voice was considered disrespectful if it didn't match up with the powers that be. And I don't think I'm unique in that. But if they were to go to consciousparentingrevolution.com, and actually on the drop-down bar you can find the media and the TED Talks and all that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. A couple questions we ask all of our guests before you head out. What is your greatest accomplishment since you've turned 50?
Since I turned 50. Wow, that was a long time ago.
Let's say 55. That's the podcast is 55.
All right, let's say 55. Well, I guess there would be a couple in terms of, dynamics and the inner relationships. The greatest accomplishment is to be able to say that I've still got really close relationships with my kids and my family, and that those aren't just happening. They take tending to. And I would say that professionally, we're really in a big push to find a network that will run the Conscious Parenting Revolution programming. And so we're right in the midst of that. And I'm proud of myself for taking that on.
That's exciting. So, and that leads right into my next question, which I think I know the answer to, but where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Well, there you go. Yeah. So hopefully that's where we see ourselves in 10 years, is that the ideas and the availability is so much more accessible.
Thank you so much for coming today and sharing that. You're amazing. And all of your information will be in the show notes, and people can find you and follow you. So thank you. And thank you all for listening and for watching this episode of Living Ageless and Bold. Thank you for listening or for watching this episode of Living Ageless and Bold. If you haven't already, please make sure you hit subscribe. And if you like the episode, I hope that you will give us a great review. You can also head over to livingagelessandbold.com and sign up for information, inspiration, and exclusive opportunities for us, women over 55. Thanks for listening. And remember, no matter what you do, keep living ageless and bold.